Everyone thinks the office is a neutral place, professional, cold, detached. But what happens when it turns into the stage for an irresistible game between two coworkers who can't stand each other, yet can't stay apart? This is proof that sometimes love is born where it never should be, among spreadsheets, meetings, and provocations that border on madness. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on the bell so more people can share these emotions with us. Some women dream of a white dress. Melissa Graham dreamed of a new toner for the printer and a full week without an HR crisis. Romantic? Not in the slightest. She was a practical woman. And for a practical woman, there was no greater thrill than silence, respect for the Google Calendar, and a steaming hot coffee waiting on her desk precisely at 8. But that morning, a Wednesday with the scent of fresh beginnings, Melissa walked into Envision Media headquarters convinced that, for the first time in weeks, the universe wouldn't set her up. She wore a flawless pencil skirt, a strategically loose bun, and the look of someone who refused improvisation before 10 a.m. She crossed the lobby clutching a latte like it was a trophy, received a shy good morning from 2 interns, and punched in the code to the executive suite door with the punctuality of someone who owned the game. The door opened with that comforting click, and then she stopped. A man was sitting at the side desk, her side desk, typing on her ergonomic keyboard, occupying her territory, which until the day before had been exclusively hers. "Can I help you?" she asked, in a tone that already decided the answer would be no. He lifted his eyes, and Melissa briefly forgot how to conjugate verbs, because the man was handsome in a quiet, well-trained, dangerous way. Tall, dark, effortlessly elegant. Dark, hair cut with precision, neatly trimmed beard, and a dress shirt rolled up at the sleeves, revealing strong wrists and an expensive watch, worn like it had been carelessly forgotten there. He typed with long, quick fingers, and when he looked at her, his expression was the worst of all, confident without arrogance. "You must be Melissa Graham," he said, voice deep and diction polished. "Scott Bishop, Michael's new assistant." Melissa didn't answer right away. She only blinked once and processed the words as if they were corrupted data in a spreadsheet. Liza, like a sneaky whisper of fate, appeared through the side door. "Oh, you've already met the new hire," she said brightly, though her tone carried a quiet undertone of "forgive me, friend." Melissa turned, not even pretending to hide her irritation. "Hired for what exactly?" "To be your support. Michael thought you could use some backup. Now that you're taking over logistics for the Dawson Global campaign, it's a big deal, Mel." She forced a smile. Inside, she was screaming, "Backup?" Melissa Graham didn't need backup. She was the backup. "And he sits here?" She pointed. Scott raised an eyebrow. "Badge is still warm, but yeah. Looks like I'm the newest resident of your executive republic." Liza backed away slowly, muttering a soft "good luck" before vanishing. Melissa stood there, frozen. Long enough to hate herself for noticing Scott smelled good, but not that Sunday magazine cologne good. No, he smelled like something wavering between green leaves after the rain and some damn pleasant memory. And that kind of smell was treacherous. She walked to her desk, sat down, opened her laptop, and didn't say a word. But the tension in the air? That spoke loudly enough. Scott smiled without invitation. "Do you like jazz?" "I like silence." "Then we've got a problem because I tend to think out loud, and talk along, and sing if the coffee's too sweet." She turned to him. "And do you always invade spaces with such lightness?" "I tend to adapt, but I like to see how people react when someone new breaks their routine." Melissa parted her lips, but didn't respond. She only smiled. A dry, sharp, cutting smile. "Great. Because you've just met the worst part of mine." By lunchtime, Melissa was determined to turn her indignation into something nutritiously sarcastic. At the agency cafeteria, she found Liza reading a salad, label like she was reviewing a lease agreement. "You forgot to tell me the board decided to import eye candy, laced with irritation for my office." Liza grinned. I knew you'd notice the eye candy before the irritation. He sits right next to me, Liza. Right next to me. The man talks like he's narrating a BBC documentary. And he has that little smirk of, I've already won this debate and you haven't even started arguing. And do you want to hit him or kiss him? I want to fire him, with class, preferably with a note. Good luck with your next round of provocations, somewhere very far from me. Liza bit into her sandwich with relish. Mel, may I remind you that you've been single for 16.5 months? And happily so. You broke up with Tinder's algorithm, said it offered options incompatible with the acceptable IQ level for adult conversations. Lie. I said Tinder was a buffet of ugliness with an intolerance for emotional depth. Liza burst out laughing. Well, the universe just served you a hot dish right at your side of the desk, and you're really going to sit there pretending you don't smell it? Melissa folded her arms. Scott Bishop is handsome, annoying and handsome, but he's in my territory, and no one messes with my routine without facing the consequences. Meanwhile, across town, Scott walked through the door of the apartment he shared with Lance, his longtime friend and self-proclaimed master of human behavior analysis. Lance was in an old t-shirt, shorts, flip-flops, and with a bowl of popcorn in his lap, watching a reality show about anxious pastry chefs. So, how was your first day surrounded by dramatic ad execs and people having existential crises over logos? Scott tossed his backpack onto the couch. I met the most structured woman in America. Structured? She hates me, with elegance, with posture, with vocabulary. Lance laughed. And you're already in love? Not yet. But if she keeps looking at me like that, I'll marry her arrogance and sign the contract with a gold pen. Just be careful, those women who run the world with a single Excel tab, they break hearts the way they close browser windows. Scott smiled. And you know I love a system that's hard to hack. If there was anything more precious to Melissa than her professional reputation, it was her ability to stay in control, even when everything inside her screamed to lose it. And that Thursday, the second morning of Scott Bishop at the company, she had already noticed 3 signs of the apocalypse. He wore invisible earbuds, which meant he hummed without realizing. He typed fast in rhythm like he was flirting with the keyboard. And worst of all, he talked to everyone. Melissa watched him out of the corner of her eye, pretending to review reports, while Scott spread charm at the coffee machine, joked with, the woman from finance helped a clumsy intern, and chatted with the CEO himself, as if they'd been friends for years. And of course, he did it with the ease of someone who didn't mind being watched. It was as if the world had made peace with him, and was now bending in small concessions just to see him smile. You have a very specific talent for getting under my skin before 9, she muttered without looking up from her screen. Scott spun around in his chair. His tie was loose, sleeves rolled up, and he held a cup of hibiscus tea no one knew the origin of. Resting his chin on his hand, he smiled. I'd take that as a compliment. You seem like you need to be provoked to function, like a machine that only turns on with a good kick. Melissa inhaled deeply, slowly, as if choosing between verbal violence and the passive kind. And you seem like a spoiled child with a handsome face who always got what he wanted with a well-timed wink. Guilty, but don't underestimate the power of a well-timed wink. She typed harder. Let the keyboard absorb the frustration. Don't push me, Bishop. But you're so stunning when you're annoyed. She stopped, turned to him, serious. Listen here. If you're here to test limits, congratulations. You're already on my mental block list, right next to ex-boyfriends and LinkedIn comment threads. Is that really the level of rejection you're after? He didn't back off, just gave that half smile. No, Melissa, I want a little more. And he went back to typing, as if nothing had happened, as if that exchange hadn't made the air between them hotter, denser, charged with something she pretended not to recognize. On Friday night, Ariel came home with a bottle of wine, a stuffed crust, pizza, and the expression of someone ready to poke at wounds. So how's the co-worker you hate with the intensity of a good romantic comedy? Melissa rolled her eyes. Already in pajamas, hair loose, skin faintly flushed from the hot shower. She held a glass of wine in her hand but hadn't taken the first sip yet. He's unbearable, charming, articulate, smart. The kind who knows he's desired and plays with it. And does he desire you? Melissa almost answered with irony, but swallowed the words. I don't know. He watches me, pokes at me, studies me like I'm a puzzle he wants to solve or take apart. Ariel sat beside her sister on the couch, crossing her legs like a loyal spectator to the drama. And what do you feel? I feel like flipping his desk over and then sitting on his lap, Melissa whispered. Then huffed. I hate this. I hate feeling thrown off balance. He knocks me out of my position. Maybe you need to get out of that position every once in a while. Melissa turned to her sister, serious. You don't understand, Ariel. At work, if you slip, someone runs over you. One wrong smile and they already assume you're available. To be ignored. I built this name with precision. I'm feared, respected, unquestionable. On Saturday morning at the apartment across town, Lance found Scott making pancakes with caramelized bananas, humming an old R&B tune with the indecently easy air of someone far too relaxed for a man who was supposedly being despised. That's your way of handling mutual hostility? Lance asked, rubbing his eyes, still half asleep. Scott didn't look away from the skillet. That's my way of not thinking about work on the weekend. Lance raised an eyebrow, grabbing a mug of coffee. You've been talking about her a lot for someone you supposedly barely know. She's hard to ignore, Scott said with a shrug. And she calls me by my last name like it's a war crime to use my first. Maybe she just doesn't like you, Lance said bluntly. Oh, that I'm sure of. I just haven't figured out if it's personal or principle. Lance sat on the high stool, staring at his friend. And why do you act like that's entertaining? Scott flipped the pancake with surgical precision. Because she tries to stay in control all the time, and me? I'm a walking metaphor for the chaos she hates. Lance chuckled. If it were me, I'd have let it go already. You've always been good at not insisting where you're not welcome. Scott finally looked at him. Exactly. But with her, it's different. It's like every jab is an invitation. Unintentional, but an invitation all the same. Lance sipped his coffee and shook his head. And you still wonder why you're always in trouble. Meanwhile, across town, Melissa nudged the bathroom door open with her foot, balancing a hairbrush in her mouth and a cup of tea in her hand. Ariel watched from the bedroom doorway, with that look of someone who had long made peace with her sister's chaos, but not with her denial. You do know you're getting dressed to go to the grocery store, right? Ariel said, arms crossed. It's Saturday, a day to remind myself I still have control over something, Melissa replied. Her sister laughed. Control, Melissa? Ever since that man showed up at the company, you've talked about him more than you talk about your boss. Melissa pulled the brush from her mouth and pointed it. It's not out of interest. It's out of necessity. He has this gift of walking into any room like he owns it, and leaving behind a trail of chaos, with expensive cologne and irritatingly polished remarks. Ariel studied her for a moment. And if he weren't so good-looking, you'd already have forgotten him, right? Melissa huffed. He could be Brad Pitt in the post-coffee era. He'd still be nothing but a distraction. And can't it just be that? A distraction? The last distraction I had ended with a passive-aggressive warning and eternal silence on iMessage. Poetic. Ariel smiled, leaning against the doorframe. Then maybe it's time to update your type. Start with someone who doesn't mess with your mood before the workday even begins. Melissa shrugged. I'm just afraid of becoming one more. That office moves fast. Today it's you, tomorrow it's the receptionist. Ariel stepped closer and touched her sister's shoulder. Then don't fall. But don't pretend. You're not looking either. Melissa gave a cynical smile. Bishop isn't someone you ignore. He's like a phone notification at 3 a.m. Annoying, but you always look. On Monday, right before lunch, The CEO of Envision Media called a quick meeting to announce a new project with a trip to the International Media Conference in Chicago. 3 days of immersion, 2 company representatives. One of them, Melissa. The other, guess who? She squeezed her pen hard enough to bend the metal clip and slowly turned to look at Scott, who was flipping through the printed materials with the casualness of someone who had no idea the bomb that had just exploded in her lap. "You knew about this?" she hissed through her teeth, leaning slightly in his direction. He lifted his eyes with a half-smile. "Only read the email this morning, but look on the bright side. It'll be productive. For who? For me, at least." She blinked slowly, fighting the urge to throw her notepad at him. "I'd rather share a room with a choking vacuum cleaner." Scott smiled, closing the folder with unnecessary elegance. "Hope the vacuum's got a clear schedule, because I just confirmed our flight together." Melissa sank into her chair like someone already mourning the loss of their sanity. The back of the room, Liza simply watched, amused, sending silent messages with her eyes. Something between good luck and tell me everything later. Melissa, however, could only think of one word that rhymed with conference and still defined what this trip promised to be: madness. Melissa arrived at the office early, as she always did on Mondays. The elevator still smelled of disinfectant and freshly brewed machine coffee, an aroma she hated and loved in equal measure. With her heels echoing through the still silent hallway, she savored the subtle pleasure of being in control. For 10 minutes, that floor was hers alone. Peace, silence, order. Until the door opened. "I thought only ghosts clocked in at this hour," said a voice behind her, lazily amused. Scott's voice always sounded as if it had just walked out of a black and white film. Deep, slightly rough, with an accent that wasn't quite regional, but carried arrogance in the way it shaped vowels. She turned with the polite smile she reserved for corporate events. "I thought men with perfectly tousled hair usually showed up late. Or is that the trick? You sleep with hair pomade?" Scott stepped into the room, balancing a cup of coffee with the ease of someone who commanded. "Chaos with one hand. Professional secret. But I can lend it to you if you want the same effect in the hallways. My effect tends to be different. Silence and productivity. Interesting. Mine's throwing off schedules and smiles." He winked. Yes, the bastard actually had the audacity to wink. As if that were allowed before 9 a.m. Melissa drew a deep breath and went back to typing, ignoring the way he leaned against the doorframe. Scott wasn't just there. He looked like he'd been hired, as a luxury distraction, an elegant nuisance wrapped in a well-cut blazer with a side of irony. Later, while printing reports for the finance meeting, she heard footsteps approaching on the carpet and already knew it was him. Scott walked with irritating confidence, like someone who knew the world adjusted itself to make room for him. "Printer broken, or are you hypnotizing the toner?" he asked, his voice far too close to her ear. "I'm trying to manifest your dismissal, but apparently the printer doesn't handle wishes," she replied without turning. "Shame. I'd like a copy of you in every department." She slammed the printer tray shut hard enough to make it look accidental. "I'd like you laminated, just so you could be ignored safely. You're secretly wishing for me, Graham. Dangerous thing. I might find out." Melissa grabbed the reports, brushed past him without looking, and headed for the meeting room. "The only dangerous thing here is your ego." Scott returned to his desk laughing to himself, satisfied like a man playing chess with pieces of sarcasm. He knew he got to her, not because of charm, though he was well aware he had plenty, but because Melissa was the perfect opposite of his well-aimed chaos. Organized, sharp, rational even when she breathed. He saw her as an enigma in a blazer with neutral lipstick, and that was fun, nothing more. Teasing Melissa Graham was his equivalent of golf, irritatingly satisfying. That night, back at the apartment he shared with Lance, Scott walked in with a bag of tacos and a mind stuck on a travel spreadsheet. "You're still thinking about the conference?" Lance asked, cracking open a beer. Yeah, and about the fact that I'm spending 5 days with a woman who hates me with the intensity of a controlled fire. Then cancel the flight. Ask your boss to switch your partner. Oh no, that's exactly why it's going to be great. She gives me better comebacks than any brainstorm. It's like arguing with a sexy lawyer who knows where to hit without leaving marks. You're dying to kiss her or to get sued, still weighing the risks. Across town, Melissa was having salad with Ariel on the couch, the news murmuring in the background and a pile of laundry waiting to be folded. "You're really traveling with him?" Ariel asked, folding one of her shirts. "I didn't have a choice. The company wants both departments represented, and apparently the universe wants to laugh in my face." "Is he really that bad?" Melissa chewed harder than necessary. "He's not bad. He's irritatingly functional. Good-looking, smart, funny, articulate, and absolutely unbearable. It's like being allergic to Belgian chocolate. Have you considered that you might like him in spite of it? I've considered that you talk a lot of nonsense when you're eating carbs." On the morning of the trip, the airport was a parade of briefcases, coffees, and important people pretending not to be tired. Melissa wore a light-tailored suit, flats, and dark sunglasses. Scott arrived in a leather jacket over a dress shirt, a backpack slung casually over one shoulder, and that indecently tousled hair that looked deliberate. "I thought you'd check your sharpness with the luggage," he said as he walked up to the boarding gate. "I thought you'd get lost in the X-ray machine and come out with a bit of humility," she replied without even removing her sunglasses. On the plane, she chose the window seat. He took the one beside her, stretched out like he owned the place, and offered her a mint. "To keep things fresh between us," he said, with the most cynical smile she had ever hated liking. Melissa accepted, in silence. But she thought, one day I'll find out if he was born this way, or if it's just a 3D simulation of charm. The plane took off under a gray sky, as if the universe had understood it was Monday and decided to match the palette. Melissa adjusted her seatbelt with the coldness of someone determined to ignore every inch of the human being sitting beside her. Scott tilted his head slightly, giving her a sidelong glance that seemed casual, but nothing about him ever was. "Do you like flying?" he asked, his voice lower than usual, almost conspiratorial. "Only if I'm alone." "What a coincidence. So do I." Melissa turned her head, making no effort to hide her disdain. But that was the thing. Always the thing. The way he spoke as if every line were a rehearsed dance, as if sarcasm were a second skin. The flight attendant approached with drinks. Melissa ordered coffee. Black. "Same for me," he said, and when she walked away, he added, "I love how you pick drinks that match your soul. Strong and hot, intense and impossible to ignore." Melissa closed her eyes for 2 seconds, breathing like someone who needed to remind herself homicide was still a federal crime. Arrival at the hotel was quick. The company had reserved 2 adjoining rooms at a boutique hotel downtown. Too modern to be sober, too elegant to be tacky. Scott walked into the lobby as if he'd been there 1,000 times, even if it was his first. Melissa stepped ahead, handing over the documents for check-in, trying once again to ignore the man who could turn any reception into an informal runway. "We'd like separate rooms," she told the receptionist before he could open his mouth. "Don't worry, everything's already arranged," the woman replied with a smile. He looked at Melissa with a mock-offended air. "You're that sure you don't want me in the same room? I'm sure I don't want you on the same planet." "Okay, Mars is still hiring, but I'll miss the black coffee soul." He held the elevator door with his foot and waited for her to step in. Melissa entered, clutching her folder to her chest. "Chivalry now? What's the goal? Make me trust you and then pull the rug out?" "No. I just think you deserve open doors, even if it's only in elevators." She jabbed the 12th floor button hard and ignored him for the rest of the ride. Scott leaned against the elevator wall, hands in his pockets, a discreet smile tugging at his mouth. This wasn't about seduction. It was about bothering her with charm. And he was doing absurdly well. That night, the welcome event was held on the hotel rooftop. Executives, marketing directors, designers, advertisers, a salad of egos stacked in glasses of white wine, and presentations with minimalist logos. Melissa wore a burgundy sheath dress, elegant and functional. Hair up, makeup discreet. Enough to look untouchable. And Scott, well, Scott arrived late enough to make an entrance, white shirt sleeves rolled up, and that walk. He always walked like he had a soundtrack. "Are you following me or punishing me?" she asked the moment he stopped beside her. "Just checking to see if you've sabotaged any networking yet." "Sabotage? I am networking. You're the main event, Melissa, and everybody here knows it, including that guy from HR who just spilled wine on the carpet while staring at you." She tried not to laugh. She really did. "How can you be this irritating and this observant at the same time?" "It's my gift. Yours is looking unshakable when you're seconds from screaming." "I'm always seconds from screaming. And still so elegant. Are you going to keep complimenting me until I forget you're unbearable?" "Sometimes it works." Melissa moved away to greet a manager from another branch. Scott stayed put, watching. Not the outline of the dress or the stiletto heels, but the way she held her composure even when the world around her looked like an improv theater. The steadiness, the precision, the way she never asked for space. She entered, and the space adapted. Later, back in her room, Melissa called Ariel. Her sister answered while eating popcorn and watching some romantic series with a tragic ending, which, for Ariel, counted as comforting entertainment. "So, how was the flight with your arch-rival?" she asked bluntly. "He's a walking mix of irony and expensive cologne, and he's handsome. You're not helping. I just want to know if he tried anything. Of course not. He just exists, and that's unbearable enough." Meanwhile, Scott sprawled in the armchair of his room, sending Lance a voice note. "Man, this woman challenges me with one line and then pretends it never happened. She hates me with such class, it's practically art." "And you?" Lance replied, laughing. "I'm having fun, honestly. And if fun turns into desire, then I'm screwed." The next day, the conference began early. Lectures, workshops, panels with complicated names and too many acronyms. Melissa took notes with the precision of a corporate surgeon. Scott, on the other hand, preferred to absorb details with his eyes, and sometimes those eyes drifted to her. During the coffee break, he approached with a crooked smile. "Writing down the formula for corporate dominance? You should try it. Might help you keep your mouth shut during lectures. But if I stay quiet, you'll miss me. I'll miss silence. You lie so well. Almost convinces me you don't like my company." "I don't like your company. And yet you don't walk away. Because you don't walk away. Maybe I'm stuck in your orbit, Melissa. Too much gravity and 5'5" of sarcasm. I'm about to throw my coffee into your orbit." Melissa gripped her cup tightly, though what she really wanted was to crush it between her fingers until it burst. Not out of real anger, but because of a certain irritation that had a name, a perfectly tailored blazer, and the cursed ability to sound interesting while being insufferable. The conference hall was wide, with tall windows letting the light flood in as if everything there were too important for shadows. And Scott, of course, looked as though he'd been designed for that setting. He moved among people as if he already knew all the answers, even when the question was, who let this man be that good-looking? She watched him from a distance sometimes, not because she wanted to, or so she insisted, but because he kept appearing like a perfume ad in an expensive magazine, impeccable, pretentious, and absurdly present. That afternoon, while others split between workshops and presentations, Melissa tried, unsuccessfully, to ignore how he always ended up within her line of sight. Sometimes talking with someone important, sometimes alone, scrolling on his phone with a focused expression, twirling a pen between his fingers. The same pen he had earlier used to poke her arm when she refused to answer a provocation. He seemed to have a knack for being wherever she was, as if he had a sarcasm radar and was always looking for more ammunition. During one panel, she realized he had switched seats with someone just to sit 2 rows behind her. And when it ended, he passed by her in the narrow hallway, brushing her shoulder lightly and murmuring in her ear, 10 out of 10. Your bored face was the best part of the presentation. She turned, but he was already gone, the way he always did, leaving behind a phrase and vanishing like a misplaced comma in the middle of a decent thought. Melissa hated it, hated how his brain moved too fast and how he seemed to delight in stirring hers. Hated even more the fact that, no matter how hard she tried to deny it, it shattered the monotony of any event. He was an emotional earthquake with a smile that looked like it had already read the manual of her defenses. And the worst part, he knew it. Scott, on the other hand, was having fun. She was predictably unpredictable, a chess game where each of her moves only made the match more compelling. The way she pressed her lips to hold back a reply, the narrowed eyes that challenged him without words, that habit of feigning indifference while discreetly scanning him when she thought he wasn't looking. But he always was. He loved observing. Details. The way she leaned to grab a brochure, how she fixed her hair when she was nervous, and the faint crease between her brows when he appeared nearby, which he did on purpose, of course. She didn't know it yet, but he was turning the entire event into a stage for their game. A game she swore she wasn't playing, but played better than anyone. Between panels and discussions about industry targets, he slipped in barely audible remarks over coffee, brushed her arm lightly in passing, and pretended not to notice the deadly glare he got in return. And still she stayed, always responding, never walking away. Melissa began to realize she hated how he made her conscious of herself, of her own body, of the way she crossed her legs or held her cup. It was as though he noticed everything, even without looking directly. And still she looked. She always looked. When the clock marked the end of the day's activities, participants returned to the hotel to prepare for the second evening's dinner. Melissa was the first to leave the room, feigning urgency. But before turning down the hallway, she risked one last glance over her shoulder. Scott was there, smiling, as if he already knew. She exhaled, annoyed. With him, with herself. 'Cause that damn man was like a catchy song, the kind you claim to hate, but hum in your head all the time. The two ended up at the same table, inevitably. The restaurant was elegant with low lighting and wine being poured as though it were liquid oxygen. "What's your tactic?" she asked after 2 sips. "For what?" "For winning everyone's trust. You walk in and in 5 minutes even the IT manager wants to hug you. I listen, I joke. I hand people their egos back wrapped with a bow. So, manipulation? Charm. Strategy. It's you wanting to understand why it doesn't work on you. It works on everyone but me. Because I see. And what do you see, Melissa? Someone who hides behind his own charisma. And you hide behind efficiency. The difference is that my mask works, and mine bothers you." She looked at him, long enough for the tension to no longer be about words. But it wasn't desire, not yet. It was something else. It was challenge. Later that night, in her hotel bathroom, Melissa looked at herself in the mirror. She removed her makeup slowly, as if dismantling the image of the impenetrable woman were part of a nightly ritual. She thought about the week, the goals, the unfinished report. She thought of Ariel, of her friend Liza. She thought of Scott, not his face, but the line, the comeback, the way he always seemed one step ahead, and at the same time, vulnerable in those few seconds he let slip unintentionally. In the room next door, Scott lay on the bed with his arms behind his head. He thought about the next day's presentation. He thought about her voice, her sharp replies, about the fact that she might be the only woman capable of leaving him speechless for 3 whole seconds, and how addictive that was. The morning of the 3rd day of the conference began with an indecisive drizzle in Chicago, and Melissa's mood was as overcast as the sky. She had chosen impeccable tailored trousers, mid-heels, and a cream blouse that, according to Liza, gave her the look of an executive who knows exactly where she steps and who dares to step on her? What she hadn't expected was to find Scott in the hotel lobby wearing a dark gray blazer and a smile that seemed to know secrets she hadn't even confessed to the mirror. "Good morning, Melissa." His voice carried that tone balanced between mockery and velvet. "Depends on your perspective," she replied without even looking. "From mine, it's excellent. You're here, the coffee's hot, and I have 6 more hours to irritate you with class. That's what I call corporate victory." Melissa walked to the buffet table pretending indifference, but she knew, with irritating clarity, that his eyes followed her. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Since arriving at the conference, Scott had become far too constant a presence. Not exactly invasive, but strategically engaging, like expensive cologne in an elevator, unseen but clinging to memory. During the first lectures, he sat beside her, with an expression of selective focus. Selective, of course, toward anything that involved prodding her. "This lecture on innovation gave me an idea," he whispered. "How about innovating by staying quiet? Or innovating by suggesting a business dinner?" She shot him an icy glare. "If it's about business, I'd rather call legal." He chuckled softly, satisfied, not with the words, but with her tone. Melissa was at the brink of emotional exhaustion, and he knew it. For Scott, that was fertile ground. At the coffee break, he appeared out of nowhere, leaning casually against the counter, as if carved into place. Writing down the formula for corporate dominance, he teased with a crooked smile. "You should try it. Might help keep your mouth shut during lectures. But if I stay quiet, you'll miss me. I'd miss less irritating noises, like a power drill. You lie so well. Almost convinces me you don't like having me around. I don't like having you around, and yet you don't walk away. Because you have the infuriating talent of always being in the way. I prefer to think I'm a stubborn coincidence, the kind the universe insists on repeating. The universe can insist all it wants. I still vote for your extinction. Strong opinion, coming from someone who watches me more than she pretends. Spare me. I watch threats, not attractions. Funny, because I swear your eyes just slipped to my lips." She turned away, but she felt his gaze follow. It wasn't vulgar. It was meticulously charged with intention. A gaze that noticed more than her silhouette. It noticed her reactions. The way her hands clenched the cup, the tension in her neck, the discreet way she bit her lower lip when she needed restraint. Scott didn't collect bodies. He collected responses. And that day, Melissa's responses were starting to falter. During the afternoon workshop, they were separated by a long table, but their eyes met in calculated intervals. She chatted with a colleague from another state, yet knew exactly when Scott was watching. It was as if her skin betrayed her. The back of her neck tingled. The air grew heavy. And the worst part, she realized how much this was becoming routine. And the anger she felt about it was almost as strong as the fascination she refused to admit. In his mind, Melissa was like a rare puzzle, one with pieces too small and no guide image. He didn't fully understand why he felt so magnetized, but he knew this woman challenged him like no one else. Her intelligence cut deeper than sarcasm. Her irritation, paradoxically, was the seasoning that made everything more enticing. In her mind, Scott was an uncomfortable paradox. Like an expensive wine she preferred to hate, but that, for some reason, fit the mood, the music in the background, the inner silences she rarely faced. There was something in his gaze that unsettled her, and it infuriated her, more than she was ready to handle. The third day ended with a printed notice on the conference app. Free time for networking. Explore Chicago. Melissa had already planned to dine alone and escape forced socialization when she heard the voice that now seemed to have GPS for locating her anywhere. "You look like someone about to sneak back to her room," Scott said, leaning against the hallway wall. "I look like someone who knows how to set priorities. And priorities don't include enjoying one of the greatest cities in the country. Priorities include not indulging colleagues who think charm is a poetic license. See, you just called me charming. We're making progress." She crossed her arms. If I say your tie is crooked, will you take it as a compliment? Do your posture? Probably. I've thought about blocking you in real life. Too bad chemistry doesn't have a deactivate button. Come on, I'll just keep you company. With no visible intentions. She narrowed her eyes, skeptical. And what's the protocol if I want to pretend you don't exist? Pretending takes effort. And let's be honest, you're already too busy pretending you don't like me. Melissa exhaled sharply but followed, not for lack of choice, but because a part of her, the part she hated to acknowledge, wanted to see just how far he would go. Chicago at night had a sober charm. Lit buildings, glowing storefronts, and the light wind that played with her hair and carried a disguised sense of freedom. They talked about trivial things, laughed at lost tourists, spoke of work, of bad movies and coffee that was far too good. Have you always been like this? She asked. Like what? This mix of provocation and stage timing. I think I just get better with demanding audiences. Great, then prepare a monologue. 'Cause what you call an audience, I call a woman far too busy to fall for bar chatter. Who said I want you to fall? She stopped for a second, staring at him. You're playing with fire, Bishop. And you're pouring gasoline without realizing it. Melissa looked away. Her heartbeat stumbled just a little, but enough to wish the walk back to the hotel were shorter. They kept walking side by side, steps unconsciously in sync. The city offered neon distractions, music slipping from half-open doors, the distant wail of a siren. But between them, the silence now carried a different tension, a kind of mutual awareness that something had shifted, or was about to. Melissa kept her arms crossed, as if that could protect her from something she couldn't name. Scott, on the other hand, walked with his hands in his pockets, shoulders far too relaxed for a man handling a ticking bomb. That was almost civilized, she remarked as they crossed the street, the light flashing red behind them. Civilized, I'd call it historic. Modesty has always been your strong suit, and sarcasm is your favorite perfume. She laughed. She didn't want to. But she did. You think you'll always get the last word, don't you? Only if you keep answering. A few more steps and the hotel rose ahead like a necessary refuge, not because of exhaustion, but because of the urgency to interrupt something that had no name yet but already made noise. In the lobby, the yellow lighting cast soft shadows. A couple whispered near the bar. A receptionist was distracted with a phone game, and ambient music filled the space, something between lazy soul and electronic beats that seemed to whisper secrets. Scott pressed the elevator button and looked at her as if for the first time. Melissa, in turn, avoided his gaze. She was starting to hate the way he looked at her, not because it was invasive, but because it was far too precise. The doors opened, and they stepped inside. They were alone. The metallic sound of the doors closing was followed by a slight jolt, then nothing. No floor lit up, no movement, just the hum of a failing system and the air growing denser, warmer. Melissa looked at the panel, then at Scott. He raised an eyebrow, as if the universe had just handed him a gift wrapped in steel and embarrassment. Stuck? She asked, flat. Or maybe life wanted a visual metaphor for tension trapped between two bodies. He pressed a few buttons. Nothing. The elevator didn't rise, didn't descend. But the temperature, that seemed to climb. If you say this is fate, I swear I'll knock you out with my bag. I was going to say it's just a technical failure, but now I'm curious about this aggressive side of yours. Got more? She crossed her arms, leaning back against the elevator wall, but kept her eyes on him. Scott didn't move forward. He didn't need to. The way he looked at her already pushed everything forward, the air, the limits, the logic. You love testing people, don't you? She threw. Only the ones who react as beautifully as you do. That's harassment dressed up as charm. That's curiosity dressed up as control. You pretend to hate me, but you watch everything I do like it's homework. Tell me, how many times have you imagined me silent? Always. And in every version you're tied to a chair with no access to the internet. Funny. I imagined, Something similar, but you were wearing that black blouse from last night. And there was no chair. Melissa clenched her jaw. He had remembered the blouse, details, the kind of attention that didn't come from someone distracted. And the worst part? A part of her liked it. He took one step, then another. Stopped right in front of her, close enough for her to feel, the heat radiating from his skin but without touching her. Just occupying space, occupying more than space, occupying her resistance. "You're too close," she said, her voice not firm enough to sound like a warning. "I'm standing where the elevator allowed me to. Blame the engineering." She drew in a deep breath. His scent was clean, something between mint and the audacity of a man who knew he was desirable. An irritating scent, a dangerous one. He tilted his head slightly, his mouth near her ear. "If you really hated me, you'd have pressed the emergency button already. Or shoved me, or, I don't know, ignored me. Maybe I'm just trying to keep my sanity until this elevator starts working again." "Then let me make it easier. Close your eyes." She stared at him, serious, skeptical. But her lashes trembled. "Why?" "Because if you look at me right now, you might do something reckless." "Reckless is you thinking you have that much power. You don't see it. The way you answer me, how you analyze me, how you try to pretend you don't feel. It's all reaction. Reaction comes from impact, and no one reacts to something neutral." She stayed silent for long, seconds, but he could see it in her eyes. The spark was there, burning beneath the sarcasm, desire disguised as disdain. Then the light flickered. Once, twice. The elevator shuddered slightly. Melissa held her breath. When the doors finally opened, she walked out without a word. But the back of her neck burned, and he knew. Scott didn't follow her right away. He stayed, half smiling, his body still ablaze. "Sleep well, Melissa," he murmured, though she couldn't hear. "Or at least try, because I won't." And then, alone in the empty elevator, he leaned his head against the wall and closed his eyes, still carrying her scent in his thoughts. Melissa woke before the alarm. Her eyes stared at the hotel ceiling, but her mind was still in the elevator. The air between them, the words spoken, the unspoken, the closeness, the way he whispered, as if he knew his voice in that tone, carried far too much power. She hated knowing that. Hated even more the fact that instead of nightmares about deadlines or outdated charts, what had kept her awake through the night were his eyes. Blue, provocative, absurdly confident. And the heat. He hadn't even touched her with, but had somehow left behind. She got out of bed like someone trying to outrun her own mind. She needed armor for the day. She put on the best she had packed. A black pencil skirt, an ivory silk blouse, elegant heels, subtle makeup, the right touch of perfume. Not that she was dressing for anyone. It was for herself. Of course it was. She went down for breakfast and he was already there. Scott sat at a table with a cup of coffee in front of him, reading some article on his tablet. His shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair perfectly disheveled like he'd woken up ready, and that air of a man who had slept as if nothing had happened. He lifted his eyes when he saw her, and smiled. "Good morning, Miss Gravity in person." Melissa froze for a second, pretended not to hear. "Sleep well?" he pressed, raising a brow. "Or did the nightly chaos keep you thinking?" "I slept like a rock," she answered, pouring herself coffee. "And you?" "I dreamed of elevators and sexy threats." She huffed, but the corner of her mouth betrayed a near smile. She sat across from him. "Today's the 4th day of the conference. Please, at least try not to scare any speakers. I'm a visual incentive. I make people talk faster. You're a hormonal distraction. A threat to other people's productivity." He leaned forward. "And still, you sit with me every morning." She looked up, challenging. "Because I'd rather control chaos than be caught off guard by it." The day went on with lectures and group dynamics. Melissa tried to focus, but Scott seemed to have a mission to tilt her axis of rotation. He slipped her provocative notes during panels, scribbled in his notepad. "How many synonyms for bored do you know?" This guy's voice made me miss the stuck elevator. "You look way too gorgeous for a corporate event. That should be considered cheating," she answered with sharp looks and curt comments. But her chest no longer knew whether it wanted to kill him or hear more. During breaks, he appeared at her side like an extension of curiosity itself. "You realize we've spent more time together these days than in all the months at the company? And the quality of my wrinkles proves it." Wrinkles. He looked at her like she'd committed a crime. "You don't have one. Must be the effect of constant rage. Keeps the skin tight." "Funny, I thought it was the effect of dealing with idiots with toxic levels of self-esteem." He laughed, and for a moment Melissa realized that laugh wasn't just charm. It was genuinely amused, disarming, and that was a problem. The days came with the conference room emptying slowly, as if even the clock wanted to delay what came next. Melissa gathered her papers in silence like someone trying to balance professionalism on a tightrope. She knew he would come, and he did. Scott stopped beside her, hands in his pockets, voice far too low to be casual. "I know you. Said you don't repeat bad series, but what about good walks?" She sighed without looking up. Is that an invitation or self-evaluation? A challenge, maybe. "Thought we could continue the tour. You've only seen half of Chicago. Feels almost unfair to leave it at that." Unfair to the city or to your ego? Both, but mostly to suspense. Don't you hate leaving stories unfinished? She closed her folder, facing him with an expression feigning disinterest, but carrying that uncomfortable spark of, "I want to, but I won't give in." "If I agree, do you promise not to turn every corner into a provocation? Rehearsal?" "Promise, this time no script. Just the city, a little silence, and whatever's left in between." Melissa hesitated for less than a second, and that was exactly what made him smile. A little later, they were walking along the banks of the Chicago River, now on the opposite side where tourists were fewer, and old buildings told stories without interruption. The sky still held traces of a stubborn sunset tinged orange. A light breeze carried the scent of water and warm concrete. "Funny how the city feels different, just by changing the angle," she said, without looking at him. "So do you when you're not hiding behind sarcasm." "Funny. I was about to say the same about you, when you're not rehearsing charm on purpose." He laughed. This time it wasn't provocation, it was genuine. They passed through an alley lit by strings of bulbs hanging between buildings, where a group of friends chatted around iron tables. Someone played the guitar skillfully but without pretense. It wasn't jazz, nor pop. Something between folk and the soundtrack of a movie no one remembers by name, but that left a pleasant shiver. Scott offered her a coffee from one of those hidden cafes only true locals would recommend. Melissa accepted without comment, and the silence between them turned into something she didn't yet know how to name, but recognized. "Do you always walk on the left side?" she asked, more to chase away her thoughts than for the question itself. "Only when I want to. Protect someone from traffic." She smiled but looked away. Was that rehearsed or did it come naturally? "I'll let you decide." Farther ahead, he stopped in front of an old sculpture of twisted metal, where the city's reflections distorted like a funhouse mirror. Melissa studied her own reflection and remarked, "Funny how sometimes you have to distort things to see them more clearly." "Or stop running to actually see them," he said too quietly. She pretended not to hear, but she stayed. She didn't leave. The hotel appeared in sight like a reminder that every night must end, yet the way their steps slowed betrayed the desire to prolong whatever this was. In the lobby, the elevator was already waiting. They stepped in together, just the two of them. Again. This time the silence was even denser. No blackout, no technical excuse. Just them. The memories of the night before and the question both avoided. "Funny," he began. "Yesterday the elevator nearly broke. Today I think I'm the one about to." She looked at him unsmiling. "Don't be predictable. I'm trying to be honest." "Try harder." He leaned in slightly, not touching her. just enough for his voice to brush against her skin. "You're addicted to control, Melissa. And I'm addicted to testing limits. There's no way this ends well." "Who said I want it to end well?" The doors opened. Neither of them moved for a few seconds. This time, she left first, again. But the hesitation in her step gave everything away, and he knew. He knew that next time wouldn't depend only on him. At the airport the next morning, Melissa pretended to be absorbed in her phone, a crossword puzzle she had no intention of solving. Scott, beside her, flipped through an in-flight magazine with the same indifference of someone reading a shampoo label. "I thought you'd use your free time to hide from me in the lobby cafes," he said, without looking up from the magazine. "That was the plan. But then I remembered your ability to find me is almost paranormal. Survival tactic, your distraction shaped like provocation. If I don't stay close, I lose control of the script. Good thing you admit the script isn't yours. Whose do you want it to be then? Fate's?" She lifted her eyes for just a second. "I'd rather there be no script, that it end before it turns into tragedy." Scott closed the magazine. "Funny, I've always preferred surprising endings, but lately I'm starting to like the idea of a good old romantic twist." That was a pickup line? That was a badly disguised confession. And you heard, "Because you wanted to." During the flight, Melissa chose the window seat again, headphones ready as a shield, but she never turned them on. She just sat there, staring at the clouds, pretending his arm brushing discreetly against hers was by accident. Scott beside her didn't sleep, didn't speak. He just looked at her from time to time as if reading the preface of a book he hadn't decided whether to open. When the plane landed, something unspoken lingered in the air. Something they both pretended not to notice. Something that lived between the almost of the elevator and the not yet uttered of the hotel hallway. At home, Melissa dropped her suitcase in the corner and was greeted by Ariel with a glass of wine and an expression that mixed curiosity and sarcasm with surgical precision. "Before you say anything, I want the unedited version. No cuts, no professionalism, just the raw truth." Melissa tossed her bag on the couch and took a deep breath, already opening the cabinet for another glass. "The conference was productive. The city beautiful. I learned a lot. Melissa. And Bishop is a problem. There it is, now we're starting." Melissa poured herself wine, took a sip like someone needing to soften memories, and dropped into the armchair. "He's irritating, arrogant, and he has the awful habit of looking like the leading man in every movie I pretend not to like." "And did you two hook up?" "No, but almost. And does that almost taste like regret? That almost tastes like a mistake that maybe I'll still make, in an extremely unfavorable scenario, and quiet, and without witnesses." Ariel smiled, drinking as if toasting to the irony of the universe. "You're screwed. I know. And loving it. Go to hell." On the other side of the city, Scott walked into the apartment and was greeted by Lance, who was already waiting with pizza, a remote, and the look of someone who had sniffed something strange in the air. "You're different." "What's that supposed to mean?" "You left with the aura of a charming scoundrel. You came back with the energy of someone who listened to Billie Eilish on the plane." Scott dropped his backpack on the floor and cracked open a beer. "I'm just tired or enchanted." Scott took a sip and let slip, half by accident. "Melissa is a labyrinth. Every time I think I figured her out, she changes the path." "So you're still trying to get in?" "I don't even know if I ever got out." Lance flopped onto the couch and concluded, "If this were a game, you'd be completely screwed. But since it's real life, you're just in love." Scott didn't answer, but the crooked smile gave him away. On Monday, the office was exactly as they'd left it. Screens too bright, coffee that tasted like nothing, and people trying to look busier than they really were. Scott was already there when Melissa arrived, sitting in the swivel chair, slowly spinning with a cup of coffee in one hand and a smile that had no business being that comfortable in a shared space. "Late," he said, without looking. 2 minutes isn't late. Its charm. Then I'm at a disadvantage. I got here early, with coffee. She dropped her bag with a sigh and raised a brow. Trying to buy me with caffeine? Trying to balance the atmosphere. Thought the warm aroma of a good espresso might soften your morning bad mood. She stepped up to his desk, took the cup without ceremony, and drank. Still hot, unlike your jokes. Still sharp, unlike the meetings we have ahead. You talk like you actually enjoy being here. I do. Shared office, major campaign, creative tension, and you. Melissa huffed, but without aggression. It was almost a laugh disguised as exhaustion. You were hired for logistics, not for flirting. Logistics is with Dawson. Flirting is a side effect. HR's fault for putting me in the same room as you. She sat down, turning on her computer. Let's set some ground rules. No double entendres, no romantic metaphors, and don't look me like I'm a challenge you're about to win. Can I break one rule a day just to keep things interesting? She didn't answer. She was too busy typing and trying to ignore the uncomfortable heat in her stomach, the same she'd felt in the elevator, on the plane, in that damned look of his at the gate. By the way, he said, his voice lower now, closer, more dangerous. Did you sleep well after the trip, or were you thinking about the almost? She turned to him slowly, eyes narrowed, tone sharp. I slept like an angel. With my back turned and the devil at the door, still locked. Scott smiled. That smile. The one that said everything without saying a word. You know what they say about locked doors? That locks exist for a reason, and wrong keys only scratch the surface. He leaned back in his chair like someone who had just watched the best episode of the best show of his life. This dialogue should be recorded. It's got more tension than any season finale on Netflix. You're insufferable, Bishop. And you're magnetic, Graham. That's a problem. She typed another line, her lips curving into an involuntary smile, barely perceptible but real. And while he went back to reviewing Dawson's delivery spreadsheet, she thought about how that project was about to become the most productive chaos in the agency's history. And maybe the most dangerous too. The week stretched like a rope pulled too tight between the two. On one side, Melissa trying to hold her composure. On the other, Scott, provoking without touching, heating without burning. Since their return from Chicago, it was as if the conference had never ended. The office now shared for the Dawson Global Campaign Logistics had become a minefield of insinuations, crossed glances and silences that screamed louder than any brainstorm. On Thursday, the clock had already passed 8 in. The evening, the building was quiet, except for the faint hum of the vents and the occasional clink of pens she chewed on without noticing. Melissa wore a light blazer over her dress, but her shoes were on the floor, her feet bare. Scott, leaning against the edge of the table, was reviewing the slides for the third time. The dim ceiling light made the atmosphere almost intimate. Almost. Do you think this palette works with Dawson's branding? She asked, eyes fixed on the screen. I think the orange screams louder than Dawson's CEO on a budget cut day. She laughed, for the 5th time that night, and hated every one of them. You should get paid by the amount of useful sarcasm. And you should learn to hide it when you like something I say. You're terrible at it. Melissa sighed, folding her arms. This is work, Bishop. Exactly why I'm behaving, she raised a brow. This is you behaving? Believe me, you haven't even begun to see me outside executive mode. Her eyes lingered on his half a second too long. Half a second he caught with surgical precision. Okay, next item. She looked back at the presentation, the delivery schedule. He came up behind her, leaning beside her to look at the same monitor, close enough for her to catch the woody scent, not of cologne, but some indecent mix of coffee, pen ink, and warm skin. You know this division of tasks between us is working well, he said in a lower voice. When you're not trying to turn the office into an episode of a rom-com, I'd agree. And if it were one, he asked, which character would you be? The skeptic who runs from the handsome lead, obviously. Handsome, look at that, progress already. She laughed. Is ego your second language? After sarcasm, fluent in both. She turned her face, and for a moment they were dangerously close. Close enough for him to feel the heat of her cheek. Close enough for her to think of stepping back. And not. I like it when you're speechless, he whispered. That doesn't happen. I just choose my silences. Then choose this one. He didn't move, didn't lean in, just looked at her like the world had stopped there. Melissa drew in a deep breath, trying to remember why exactly she was resisting. But time stretched. The second turned into an "Biss," and she pulled away. I need coffee, she muttered, walking to the back table. He didn't follow, just watched. She came back with a mug and sat on the side couch, tucked one leg under herself, trying to reconfigure her brain. Have you always been like this? She asked, breaking the silence. This unbearable balance between charm and arrogance? It's not balance. It's elegant chaos. She laughed. That's a well-crafted self-defense. It's confession. You think I do it on purpose? You make me waste time. You make me lose control. The air grew dense, dense with unspoken words, dense with possibilities neither of them wanted to name. I'm not that kind of woman, Scott. I never said you were. And if you do, I'll break this mug over your head. He smiled, not mocking, admiring. You're the kind of woman who changes the kind of man I thought I was. Melissa felt the hit, as if each word had lodged between her jaw and her heart. Was that an attempt to convince me? No, it was an attempt to understand myself. She stayed quiet, and it wasn't the calculated silence anymore. It was the silence of doubt, of desire. When she returned to the table, they picked up the work as if nothing had happened, but everything had. By around 9:30, the city outside had already quieted, but inside, in the half-light of that meeting room turned creative bunker, everything still pulsed. Melissa projected the final version of the presentation on the screen, her eyes locked on details, as if perfectionism could save her from something she couldn't even name. Scott, across from her, leaned against the table with his sleeves rolled up, his gaze drifting between the slides and her profile, jotting down notes he knew he'd never read again. Okay, she said, lowering her voice as if she didn't want to admit it. This actually turned out really good. He lifted his eyes, smiling slowly. Want me to mark the calendar? It's rare to hear you compliment me without a slap right after. It slipped. Even so, I'll count it as the biggest win of the week. She looked at him, and in that look there was something that hadn't been there before. A beautiful kind of exhaustion, an involuntary surrender, like someone who stops resisting out of weariness or desire. I should go home, she whispered. You should. But there's still part of the conclusion that could be refined. It could. His voice dropped an octave, deep enough to slide down her spine. She closed the laptop. The click of the lid sounded like a period. She rose slowly, as if every movement were a decision, as if she were testing her own limits. What exactly are you waiting for? She asked, one brow arched. He dropped the pen, stood up, and came closer. Slow, as if every step were a question, as if he didn't just want to reach her, but break through her. For you to say no. But she didn't. She didn't say a thing. Her eyes followed him as if there were no other option. As if everything she had tried to control until now was about to erupt between them. Scott, she began, but her voice faltered, and he smiled, because he already knew. His hand lifted, unhurried. Fingers brushed along her jaw, sliding up to behind her ear, where they rested with cruel delicacy. She closed her eyes for a second as if that touch were more than skin, permission itself. I'm going to kiss you, he said. So close she felt the heat of his voice against her. Lips? No? The word came out soft, weak, almost a plea. Then stop me. His whisper rode on his breath, brushing hers, just millimeters away. She didn't stop him, and he asked for nothing else. He kissed her, but not the way she expected. Not fast, not ravenous. He began with a dangerous slowness, a kiss that explored, that savored. That seemed to say, I've been waiting for this, even if neither had ever said it aloud. His hand slid from her face to her waist, pulling her in with a firmness that didn't ask. It took. Melissa answered with her body before she answered. With her mouth. Her fingers climbed his chest up to his collar, clutching there like someone holding a secret. When she finally gave in completely, the kiss deepened. Now, yes, it was raw desire. Everything that had been building, dammed, fed for weeks. He pressed her against the table, her hips pinned to the wood, their bodies finally aligned. His hand traveled from the curve of her waist to her back, while the other slid up her arm, seeking the nape of her neck. Their kisses broke only for hot breaths, grazing skin, teasing, returning. She bit his lip lightly. He groaned low, and it made her smile mid-kiss. She pushed him back just enough to speak between breaths. This is completely wrong. Then kiss me until it feels right. And she obeyed. But what came after wasn't rational anymore. It was pure desire, mixed with anger, pride, relief. The war between them collapsing into endless kisses. When they finally pulled apart, if either of them really did, they were breathless, lips swollen, eyes dark, bodies still pressed together. That was, she tried to say but lost her train of thought. Inevitable, he finished. She laughed, panting. Turned away, trying to recover her breath, her words, her reason. Adjusted her hair as if that could restore control of anything. But it didn't. This will never work. Then let's make it fail spectacularly. Do you have an answer? For everything? No, but for your kiss I have an addiction. She closed her eyes. She could still taste him, still feel his hand at her waist, even though it was no longer there. Still feel everything. And for the first time, Melissa didn't want to run. She wanted to repeat it. She wanted to dive in. Even knowing she'd be leaping without a net, even knowing that with Scott, falling was never the problem. The problem was what would come after the fall. That night, Melissa came home with her heart beating at a rhythm that didn't respect office hours. She tossed her bag on the couch, kicked off her shoes on the way, and went straight to the kitchen, as if the open wine in the fridge were some kind of antidote for what had just happened. But there was no cure, not for this. Hey, Ariel appeared in pajamas, a tub of ice cream in hand, and the face of someone who already knew too much. You've had that look since never, actually. What happened? Melissa tried to play it off. She threw her blazer over a chair. We worked late, that's all. That's all doesn't smudge lipstick at that angle. Ariel pointed with her spoon, like a detective unmasking the culprit. Melissa stopped, touched her own lips, and smiled, just for half a second, then disguised it. Okay, I kissed Scott. Scott? The one who drives me crazy, knocks me off balance and apparently takes my breath away. Ariel's eyes widened. Did you like it? I liked it before it even happened. Melissa grabbed a glass, filled it, drank. Which is terrifying because liking him is like liking a fire. You know you'll get burned, but you get close anyway. Ariel sat on the counter, eyes locked on her sister. Does he respect you? Very much. Does he challenge you? All the time. Does he admire you? He provokes me because he admires me. Melissa leaned back against the counter, vulnerable in a way she rarely was. And he kisses me like he knows exactly what to do with me. Ariel smiled. Then maybe it's time to stop running from what's good just because it feels dangerous. You say that like it's simple. It's not, but it's the right kind of complicated. Across town, Lance opened the door half asleep, wearing his old college basketball t-shirt, working late or with Melissa. As long as I could keep from completely losing myself in her. Yikes, trouble with Melissa? I kissed Melissa. Lance blinked. Melissa, as in Melissa Graham. No, Melissa from HR. Of course it was her, you idiot. Lance threw a pillow at him. So it was the best mistake I've ever made? Or the start of a war I want to lose? You look like a man in love. I look like a man who lost the war and still said thank you. The difference is just grammar. Scott sighed, staring at the ceiling. She looks at me like she wants me gone, and then kisses me like she wants me to never leave. Man, you sound like something poets write and therapists profit from. Yeah, and for the first time, I'm glad I do. The following days were a cruel exercise in self-control. Mondays that felt like Sundays, Tuesdays that felt like temptations. Melissa walked into the office as if nothing had happened, with flawless makeup, sharp heels, and the posture of someone who ruled everything around her. But her eyes, oh, her eyes knew. Scott kept his elegance, the timing of his jokes, the kind of charm that wouldn't falter even in an earthquake. But every time she passed by, the air thinned. They avoided being left alone, but the truth was that every small encounter was more intense than any meeting. One rainy afternoon, while they were finalizing the details of the Dawson presentation, Melissa dropped a marker on the floor. Scott, passing behind her, bent down at the same time to pick it up. Their faces ended up far too close. Again. Do you always bend down for things that aren't yours? She asked, not moving back. Only when I know I can return them with interest. She swallowed hard, smiled, and walked out without looking back. But he knew he was gaining ground. The Dawson campaign's success was immediate. Recognition, invitations, a new multi-million-dollar account. But none of that felt as grand as the backstage of that victory. The glances exchanged in the elevator, the accidental touches when signing contracts, the compliments disguised as provocations. One day, at the end of a meeting, Scott waited for her at the door. The other employees had already gone home. Can I take you to dinner? Are you asking as a co-worker or as premium distraction? As a man who's interested, involved, hooked, and willing to take every risk. She looked at him, and in that look the answer was already there. Fine, but only because I have nothing better to do tonight. That was almost romantic, coming from you. Don't get used to it. Dinner became routine. Routine became touch. Touch became kiss. Kiss became weekend. The weekend became just one more night. Then another. Then all of them. And then it was dating. But the intense kind. The kind that argued about marketing strategies. At 2 a.m. and then kissed against the kitchen wall. The kind that fought over the remote control and then made up on the couch with wine and provocation. He called her impossible. She called him insufferable with dimples. And all of it was love. One night, months after the first kiss, Melissa came home early and found Ariel in the living room eating cereal straight from the box. You're home already? Where's Mr. Kisses like the world is ending? Working. She tossed her bag on the couch. But he said he's coming by later. You two look like a couple straight out of an adult rom-com. The kind that makes the audience sigh and think, I want one of those. Melissa laughed. We still jab at each other all the time. And love each other all the time, too. She stopped. And this time she smiled slowly. Yeah. I think we do. That same night, Scott walked into his apartment and found Lance playing video games. She told you she loves you? Lance asked without taking his eyes off the screen. Hi to you too. Come on, answer. Did she? Scott grabbed a beer, leaned against the doorway. Not yet, but I think she shows it in other ways. Like how? She corrects me less, listens to me more, and kisses me like there's no one else in the world. Lance dropped the controller. Man, you're screwed, like tied up, buried, glued. Scott smiled, and I've never felt better. On a random Saturday, they sat on his balcony. Melissa wore one of his t-shirts. Her bare feet rested across his lap, wine in hand, music playing low. You know, I thought you were just another problem when I first met you. And I thought you were just another wall impossible to climb. And in the end, we became a team. She looked at him, long and steady, then said softly, I love you, Scott. He took half a second, just for suspense. I know. He smiled. But it's good to hear. She threw a pillow at him. He pulled her close, kissed her. And between the kiss and the laughter, he murmured against her lips, "I love you too, Melissa. More than I ever planned." And there, in that simple touch, was the certainty that everything, every sarcasm, every provocation, every "this will never work," had been the prologue to a story that was already theirs. At the office, their romance was no longer a secret. But it wasn't a scandal either. Melissa was still demanding, quick and razor-sharp. Scott was still the bold creative, bringing ideas outside the box and comments outside the script. But now, there were looks, small smiles, discreet touches, and a general sense among colleagues that maybe love really could be born between reports, spreadsheets, and ego battles. One day, in the middle of a presentation, a client joked, "You two have insane chemistry. You can feel it from here." Scott answered without blinking, "It's the secret to productivity, loving where you work." Melissa only raised an eyebrow, but inside she was home. Months passed, projects came and went. Trips, meetings, silences that now felt comfortable. Days of exhaustion, nights of wine, long weekends in random cities. One late afternoon, they were in the office, alone, tweaking the final presentation for a new campaign. Scott leaned in, resting his chin on her shoulder, as he always did when he wanted to distract her. "Ever thought about marrying me?" Melissa didn't even look up. "I have. And I've also thought about firing you. Both options are intense. Both require courage." She turned to face him, looked straight at him. "But marriage takes more faith. And do you have it?" She smiled. "I'm getting there, slowly." He pulled her by the waist, kissed her slowly, like someone who had time. "One day, Melissa Graham, you're going to sign a lifetime contract with me. As long as it has a clause that lets me win the arguments." "Done," and they laughed. Because that was it. It was love. With sarcasm, provocations, contracts, and kisses that change the course of a story. Because in the end, destiny doesn't shout. It whispers. And Scott Bishop whispered exactly where she heard it. In her heart. A year and a half had passed since their first kiss. And now, here, in a late afternoon that looked more like a living painting, everything made sense. The breeze was warm, scented with lavender and late summer. The sky glowed that orange shade that only appears when time itself seems to know it's witnessing something sacred. Chairs in the garden were arranged in a half moon, wrapped in strings of yellow lights and magnolia petals. It wasn't a lavish wedding. It was intimate, chosen with care. Just like everything between them had been since that first, "I can't stand you," which deep down already hid an "I can't stop looking at you." Melissa adjusted the short veil, her fingers trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from awe. Awe at being there, at having made it there. She, who had always doubted even her own heart, was now trusting the rest of her life to a man who knew exactly how to throw her mind into chaos, and then, with a single glance, return her to peace. "Ready?" Ariel asked, emotional, with a smile that looked more like a sister's than a maid of honors. Melissa drew a deep breath. "Never thought I would be, but yes, I am." Across the garden, Scott adjusted his shirt cuffs. He wasn't in a full suit. That wasn't him. He was elegant, but unpretentious. His hair was styled the way she liked, messy at the edges as if saying, "I'm a rebel, but only for you." Lance, beside him, nudged his shoulder. "Never seen you this quiet. It's just that, for the first time, I want time to slow down." "Nervous?" Scott smiled. "Not nervous. Just almost desperate to see her walking toward me, the E." Music began. Not the wedding march. An instrumental version of a song they used to play on nights when they worked late and fell in love in the pauses. Every note carried unspoken memories, inside jokes, promises hidden in complicit glances. When Melissa appeared among the guests, the world stopped. Literally. No sound, no wind, just her, walking with firm steps, as if telling everyone, "It took me a while, but I found the love that defies even my logic." Scott looked at her as if he were seeing the eighth wonder of the world. With silent reverence, he extended his hand. She took it, and right there, before everyone, they didn't look like just bride and groom. They looked like partners in an emotional mischief only they could understand. The officiant kept it brief. That's how they wanted it. Nothing stiff, nothing scripted, only real. "Melissa," Scott began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "You walked into my life on the wrong foot, with sharp words and an emotional wall taller than the Great Wall of China. And still, I fell for you. For every sarcasm, every defiant look, every time you tried to deny what was already screaming in silence. Loving you was like walking into a storm without an umbrella. I got completely soaked, but I wouldn't trade a drop of it for a single dry day without you." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Scott, you are the surprise my life script would never have written. And maybe that's why it worked. Because with you, I didn't have to predict the next step anymore. I just lived. With you, I learned that vulnerability isn't weakness. That trusting isn't losing myself, it's finding myself. You taught me love can be light, even when it's intense. That it can be fun, even when it's deep. And I promise to keep loving you even when you leave a wet towel on the bed. Because I know that in the very next minute, you'll pull me close like someone who knows life only makes sense when it's messy." For two, some guests cried, others smiled with their whole hearts. And when the officiant allowed the kiss, it wasn't sealed like in fairy tales. It was real, full of desire, humor, and promise, as if saying, the best is still to come. Later, alone in the small inn where they had chosen to spend the night, Melissa was pulling pins from her hair while Scott opened a bottle of wine. "You were beautiful," he said, "and you were less cocky than usual. That scared me. It's because I had a very real fear you'd change your mind at the altar. I almost did." "Really?" She laughed. "Of course not. But it's fun seeing your panic face. You're going to torture me like this for the rest of my life?" "Gladly." "Perfect. That's what made me fall in love with you." She walked over to him barefoot, her steps soft on the old floorboards, stopped in front of him and cupped his face in her hands. "A year and a half with you taught me that love isn't about a happy ending. It's about building a new beginning. Every single day. And you, Melissa Graham, are my favorite beginning. Even when that beginning includes an elbow in your nose at 6 a.m. Your fault for sleeping too close. Your fault for making me want to fall asleep wrapped around you every single night. And you still knock the ground out from under me with just a kiss. Then come here, and the kiss came, intense, familiar, yet burning with the same fire as the first time. Because with them, love wasn't static. It was movement. It was play. It was choice. And that night between white sheets and whispered vows, Melissa understood that yes, life did have a twisted sense of humor, but sometimes it got it exactly right, especially when it placed the most insufferably irresistible man in the world right at the desk beside hers. So what did you think of this story? Enemies at work, undeniable chemistry, sharp provocations, and a romance that grows against all the rules of the corporate game. I really want to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave lots of comments. Every single one helps the channel grow and keeps us motivated to bring even more stories that make you laugh, swoon, and fall in love. And please use YouTube's hyper function to give points and boost the video. The more you hype it up, the more this story will reach people who haven't discovered the channel yet. And that makes all the difference for us to keep moving forward together on this journey.